The weight of the gavel. Isaiah Bennett stood in silence as the gavel dropped, the wooden echo reverberating through the packed courtroom like a gunshot. His suit, borrowed from a neighbor for this day, clung unevenly to his slim frame, creased and threadbare. Sweat pooled along his temples not from fear, but from a pressure that had become all too familiar. Helplessness, a kind born not from inaction, but from knowing no one in the room wanted the truth. Across the room, behind the bench, sat Judge Douglas Crenshaw, a heavy-set white man whose stone-cold expression barely shifted, except for a smirk carved into his lips, as if he'd just won a game. Life without the possibility of parole, he announced, slow and deliberate. But those words weren't just a sentence from Micah Bennett, Isaiah's older brother. They were a generational punishment. The courtroom didn't shake because justice had been delivered. It shook because Crenshaw laughed right after, loud and deep, like he'd been waiting all day to get to the punchline. Micah was led away in shackles, his head lowered, his body bent not in defeat but in disbelief. No one saw the tears in his eyes except Isaiah, who stood frozen as he watched his brother vanish through the steel doors. The jury, every face pale and tight-lipped, offered no expressions of doubt, no hesitation. The public defender barely glanced up. The alibi had never been introduced. The sole witness, a cashier who could barely stop shaking when the cops took his statement, was never cross-examined. The entire trial had been little more than theater. There would be no appeal, no second chance, just an ending. And Isaiah said nothing. Not a word escaped his lips as the courtroom emptied. He simply stared at the wooden chair his brother had sat in, then at the inscription carved above the judge's bench, "In God We Trust." But Isaiah had learned a different lesson that day. In that room, they only trusted the color of your skin. No one knew the quiet 16-year-old boy had spent every spare moment in the public library, devouring legal textbooks, memorizing cases, understanding statutes and appeals in his state. No one realized he had a photographic memory or that he'd been preparing for this day since the age of 13, not because he wanted Tobit, because he had to. Crenshaw's laugh didn't just mark the end of Micah's freedom. It awakened something in Isaiah. A storm. He walked out of the courthouse without a tear, but holding a storm behind his eyes. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops of their small Georgia neighborhood, Isaiah sat on the floor of the room he once shared with his brother. He laid out all the old case files he'd quietly borrowed from the public defender's office. The suit he'd worn now hung limp on a rusted nail, wrinkled and sweat-soaked. The desk lamp flickered to life, the air filled with the scent of cheap ink and recycled paper. Isaiah didn't need to flip through anything. The files were burned into his memory. The ignored alibi, the timestamp mismatch, the defense attorney's silence. The trial extended past legal hours. He grabbed a pencil and began writing a draft appeal by hand, referencing each statute, subsection, and procedural violation like he'd lived them. No computer, no mentor, just Isaiah, a $5 notebook, and an old laptop loaned to him by Miss Rhonda from down the block. The next day, he printed the appeal at the library. Each printed page slid out like a heartbeat, steady, stubborn, full of intent. He placed the pages in a worn envelope and put on his old suit again. The walk to the courthouse felt longer than it was 3 blocks, but it may as well have been a battlefield. At the clerk's desk stood a white woman named Barbara. Her smile was tight, her eyes unimpressed. Isaiah approached. "I'm filing an appeal from Micah Bennett," he said evenly. "Under State Statute 34, subsection G, I have the right to file within 30 days. She blinked, glanced at his envelope. "Are you a lawyer?" "No, ma'am. I'm his brother. We don't take paperwork from kids." "You're wasting your time. You're violating my right to due process under Article 11 of the state constitution," Isaiah replied, his voice calm but firm. She scoffed, turning to a man behind her, balding, heavy-set, smelling faintly of old sweat and stale gum. He grabbed the envelope, thumbed through the pages, then burst out laughing. "What is this? Some kind of TV script? You think you're the Black Atticus Finch?" He tossed the envelope into the trash. Isaiah's jaw tensed. What you just did is illegal. Go cry about it to someone who cares, the man grunted. Isaiah walked out empty-handed, but not defeated. He returned the next morning with a printed complaint to the state bar, a letter to the local newspaper, and Miss Rhonda and several neighbors walking behind him holding phones and signs. The courthouse staff didn't laugh that time. The appeal was accepted. But Judge Crenshaw had already taken notice. That afternoon, Isaiah walked the cracked sidewalk back home. Only a few yards from his front porch, a cruiser whipped around the corner and screeched to a halt. Two white officers jumped out. One tall and wiry with a crooked nose. The other stocky, his neck raw from the sun. Well, the tall one said. Crenshaw's little prodigy. Isaiah raised his hand slowly. I'm unarmed. I just came from court. They didn't care. He was slammed against the hood, metal searing his back through his shirt. The cuffs snapped on tight. They rifled through his pockets and, with theatrical timing, pulled out a small bag of weed. Isaiah froze. That's not mine. You hear that, Rick? The sunburned one said. He's innocent. They shoved him into the back of the cruiser. The neighborhood watched in silence. No one moved. No one dared. One punch to his jaw, another to the ribs. Blood filled his mouth. Pain shot down his spine. But Isaiah didn't scream, didn't beg. In his head, he recited the law's Section 12, Protection in Custody. Section 8, Evidence Chain of Custody. He knew the codes better than they did. Inside the precinct, they left him bruised and cuffed in a dim room. The bag of weed sat ominously on the table. The officers leaned in. You're going down, one said. You think Crenshaw will let you embarrass him? I know my rights, Isaiah whispered. And you're violating all of them. Then the door swung open. A black woman stepped in side-tight curls pulled back, lips pressed firm, eyes blazing. I'm his guarantor, said Miss Rhonda. And I've already posted bail. They laughed. She didn't flinch. Miss Rhonda dragged Isaiah out of that station. His face was swollen, his ribs wrapped in makeshift gauze, but his eyes burned with fire. He went home, cleaned the blood off the files, and got back to work. That night, Rhonda returned with a recording. An old tape. She pressed play. Static buzz, then a voice. We need quota 60 a month. Black one's easier. Higher sentences, lower cost. 10 grand per head. Crenshaw? Smooth as ever. Always on time. Another voice laughed. Some punk kid trying to sue you now. Isaiah stared at the player, lips parted, breath caught. He opened his laptop, dug through court archives, fast-track cases, and contracts. One name kept appearing at the bottom of those contracts. Judge Douglas Crenshaw. Attached, a private prison agreement guaranteeing monthly inmate quotas. They weren't just sentencing people. They were selling them. Isaiah's hands trembled. Micah wasn't locked up. He was auctioned. He took the files to a reporter named Tiana, journalist, known for digging up what others wouldn't touch. She cried as she read. We'll expose this. They went public. Footage aired. Protests bloomed. Justice for Micah, the signs read. In the prison pipeline, Isaiah's name echoed through the streets. But in the shadows, Crenshaw wasn't finished. Isaiah's mother's house burned down in a sudden electrical fire. His reporter ally, Tiana, went missing days later. Police found her car outside city limits, blood on the seats. Rhonda pulled Isaiah into hiding. You're a target, she warned. Crenshaw's not fighting fair. And then the bombing happened at the courthouse. 25 dead, 50 wounded. No suspects. But everyone in the neighborhood whispered the same thing. This was Crenshaw. Isaiah didn't mourn like others did. He burned. He turned back to the files. A signature on all the top-level agreements. Malcolm Bennett. Isaiah froze. His uncle. The man his mother never spoke of. The one who disappeared decades ago. He had built the entire system. Used Crenshaw like a puppet. Profited off the incarceration of his own people. Isaiah played a recording. That kid's smart, Malcolm's voice said. But smart doesn't change the order. I put Crenshaw there. I built the throne. Isaiah looked into the screen into the eyes of the man who bore his name. He wasn't just fighting a system. He was fighting family. So he walked into federal court, USB in hand. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the verdict. Guilty, not for Isaiah, but for Malcolm Bennett, a man who turned blood into business. Isaiah didn't smile. He just exhaled. Slowly. The fight wasn't over. Michael was still behind bars. Rhonda was gone. Tiana vanished. His mother, homeless. The system still intact. But something had changed. Isaiah walked home. Into the rebuilt house the community helped raise. His mother embraced him. Not with words. Just with warmth. That night, he pulled a new file from a box. A single mother accused of stealing meds for her child. He began reading. Quietly. Carefully. The war had never ended. Because Isaiah Bennett wasn't a miracle. He was the result of a system designed to fail, and a boy too stubborn to let it. And if you ever pass a cracked window glowing softly in a quiet neighborhood, you might see him still. Not a hero, not a lawyer, just a brother with fire in his chest and justice in his hands.